Hello everyone, this is Many Ninjas. Welcome to what I'm going to dub my complete Ultimate Fighter review here. And the reason I'm going to call this video that is because I'm not going to review just the main figure itself, but also the accessory pack, which is part of the reason this particular video has been so delayed, because I kind of wanted to do everything in one fell swoop. So what we're going to talk about here is going to be the base figure itself, namely how the figure actually handles and generally works here, along with a few caveats that come along the way there, and also talk about the accessory pack immediately after to see how that adds to the overall package here. So, going on with the original figure itself, just to give you a general height marker in this case, if you, depending on where you measure, you have about, I'm going to say a little over 6 inches to more like 6.5-ish, depending if you're registering from the top of the head to the tip of the hair at that point, which gets you the taller number, of course. And in terms of how his joints handle in this case, you can kind of tell this figure came before the Chosen One, which was honestly a nice to hold, very solid feeling figure on there with really nice tight joints. This particular figure actually feels kind of very light and flimsy in terms of its plastic quality ahead of that. And while the joints are very tight, I find, they're actually tight to a fault in this case, where if I had the original audio playing here, especially when I'm messing around with the upper torso in a minute, you would be able to hear an audible high-pitched squeak that would be present there, because the general fittings on this particular figure, while they're still tight, they aren't perfect. There's definitely some kind of mechanical issues that have, at least with my particular copy of this figure, that when you move it around, it doesn't move quite as nicely as you would like. Mind you, for the most part, especially like the hips and the knee joints and the elbow joints, they're going to be able to bend and they'll be able to hold their positions just fine. As you can see, the articulation is clearly based off what has become kind of the standard Action Body 2.0 bodies in this case. So everything does function as you would. Of course, also unfortunately picking with some of the main issues that come with that. Like you can kind of tell with the toes, they are a bit harder to move. They do move at this point. I actually had the ball in order to fix them up a bit, so they move a little more fluidly, but they do move at this point. And the what I'm trying to think, the kind of hip covers to cover the hip joints are definitely a bit loose in this case, as I think they're kind of more modeled over the original 2.0 joints you would have found on something like Super Saiyan 3 2.0s. So they aren't exactly a perfect fit, but they're still functional in that one. The hips also, technically, the torso on the upper body is a little narrow, it feels at times. It still looks nice in this case, and it's still very functional, but it does come off a little bit odd here. Now, one thing I need to kind of mention, and what we're going to cover before we get too far in the figure, is much as what has been recommended by a lot of people. I believe JP Toys is the very first person who gave kind of an exact number. I did go ahead and modify all the different head joint, or kind of head coverings, as well as the joint openings for the wrists, because much like everyone else had, I was very concerned with how very tight those were, because just for those that aren't fully aware, the ball joint openings for the neck peg and the wrist pegs are very, very tight on all the various hands and the heads there, so that if you don't swap them out and you kind of leave them as it is, while you probably can get away with it for a while, they are going to probably be very prone for breaking, which is why they actually had to include replacement joints with the accessory pack, which we'll cover a little more later. Now, in order to do that, what I kind of did is, as you can see from me demonstrating there, I took a 2.5mm drill and just carefully took a few twists and kind of measured out how those fit along the responding joints in this case. As you can see, I'm working with the normal head in this case and slowly removing bits and pieces of plastic in order to make sure that as I tested it, went back and forth, that it would be able to fit fine without going too far, that it would be falling loose and coming off. So as you can see, this is after me doing the modification. The heads do hold just fine on that one, and everything fits on there as supposed to. It's a nice tight fit without being excessively tight, so it will hold its position when you mess around with it. And while we have that here, let's take a look at some of the alternative faces for the normal face in this case. So we start out with the default normal one. We go into the yelling side face, which is, I believe it's usually referred to as also as the Yosha face, or the alright, depending on what sub or dub you happen to be reading for that one. And that's really all the faces that we get with normal Vegito here. And then we go to Super Vegito, which is the one that is normally on the head. So technically this neck point for it is the one that requires the least fixing, just to put that out there. As you can see, nice golden hair color. It's got a nice shine to it. A little more reminiscent to what figure arts tends to be doing these days with the hair coloring. So that's a nice fit on there. We have a normal face on there. Nice, reasonable fit. As you can see, there are numbers on the top of these because they actually reuse the exact same molds for the various heads, and they will do the same for the accessory pack, by the way, just in case you're wondering. Here's a bit of a smirking face on there. As you can see, everything fits on there really nicely. I would say, admittedly, some of the faces were a little tight and hard to fit on first, but after a few switches, they tend to fit on pretty well on there. And generally, you're not going to be having too many issues with that. Now, I know some people are kind of hit or miss on the actual hairstyle in this case, just because it is a bit kind of regular in terms of how the hair has been laid out in this case. And by regular, I mean it's a little even on every side, which is not exactly normal for, I'd say, for how normally the Super Saiyan hair gets rendered in this case. But it's still functional in this case. I still like it enough. So I would say I'm willing to give that one a pass. And for the next face we have on here, it's kind of a more of an angry, grimacing face on that one. As you can see, everything's nice and functional. It's pretty flush on there, and everything looks pretty good. Moving on to the rest of the normal accessories that come with the base figure here. We, of course, always have to have a bunch of extra hands on there. So these are kind of the martial arts karate grip hands on that one. It's worth mentioning, as you kind of see me trying to highlight the hands there. For the original legit Vegeta figure, they didn't properly fix the hands from, I'm guessing they either took it from a Goku or Vegeta in that case, and you can actually visibly see the fingernails on the original Vegito hands. In this case, you have no fingerprints. These are clearly cleaned up and meant to show that these are gloved hands. Honestly, compared to what you get from the normal figurettes, admittedly, I'm not having anything too much more to say on that, except for this one hand here, which, as you can see, is holding a piece of Majin Buu there, which is pretty much based on the Evil Buu there. In terms of the general detailing on there, it's functional, I would say. You can kind of notice it's a big seam line that's creeping down the center on there, and while there is a bit of etched in detail, it's still not a whole lot going on there. And of course, you can't have a Vegito without having some crossed arms here. Generally speaking, for the crossed arms, I feel this one's actually been handled particularly nicely because you can actually separate the arms, which makes it a lot easier to put them on there, which is very much appreciated because, at least in my version, getting the arms to actually go on is actually a complete pain in the butt because of how tight they are. I'll save you the footage of me messing around with that. Here's what it looks like with the arms on. I actually had to heat up the whole thing in hot water in order to get to do that because there's just really snug fits, and you can kind of see it fits well enough on there, but just to warn you, on yours, it might also be a really tight fit. And speaking of it, here's what the hand with the remnant of Buu is on there. As you can kind of see, it's there. You're kind of honestly limited with what you can do with this particular hand accessory. And to be honest, because of the weight of the Buu head there, or Buu piece I should really be saying there, it also kind of weighs down the arm at times. It's a bit of a heavy, chunky piece on there, where it's a nice thing to include, but it's not exactly the most interesting accessory. And here's the general comparison point. Color-wise, it's a pretty good match to actual Majin Buu itself, so I guess if you want to pose it together with that, then it's functional. Now, a month or two after that, that's when the Ultimate Fighter Accessory Pack came out, and it came with a few different items on there worth mentioning. Namely, of course, bringing us up to modern times, it came with the Super Saiyan Blue head, so you have your Vegito Blue now available, along with a bunch of faces that are pretty much going to fit on there, covering the main general expressions that came with the original figure, of course. You have a very needed Vegito accessory in the Spirit Sword, as well as a related hand, which can be pulled in and out of there just for reference. And because of the QA issues this figure had, you also have a bunch of replacement hand and neck joints to go with it. Because, like I said, that was definitely a thing for this particular release. Now, looking at the new faces for Vegito Blue here, we have the regular expression on here, kind of the more neutral, serious expression on this. As you can see, everything fits on there perfectly nicely. The hair itself is a nice kind of a slightly shiny metallic blue, which is actually pretty much right in line with the rest of the more legitimate figure art style figures in this case, so everything looks good on there. You have, now we're going to have the slight smirk on there, which I believe that was only on the Super Vegito, or the regular Super Saiyan Vegito, and they're not on the normal face. And now we have kind of the grimacing, angry look on his head, look on there. As you can see, everything fits exactly as it should, which is nice. It kind of makes you wish that they included all the expressions with the mainline heads too, but I guess c'est la vie. If they wanted that, they would probably have to charge more for this accessory pack, so I guess I can live without that for now. And of course you have a yelling expression. Admittedly, the tongue looks a little pale in this case, but it looks pretty alright in normal bit. Now as for the actual Spirisoin and related hand, that's what the hand looks like outside of the effect in this case. And as you can see, everything fits on there just fine, but it's worth noting for the effect piece, you have to kind of have that on its stand because it's actually a bit of a chunky bit of plastic that has some weight to it. And also worth noting is it can fit on there and you can have it bouncing on the figure, but if you want to get on the stand, you have to have the wrist turned in a certain way, or the hand turned in a certain way to actually fit on the stand properly. Rather than it being straight on, you have to have it kind of on a 90-degree kind of straight up and down or vertical angle, I should say, which, because you can't see the hand in effect, it doesn't look too bad, but it's kind of a weird usage. While the Ultimate Fighter here does a pretty good job of filling in the Vegito 2.0 gap in your collection, just keep in mind, in order to get there, you really need to have the accessory pack in order to fill in the gaps there. And when you put it all together, it is a bit of a pricey proposition. You're almost looking at the price of a premium figure, but without the quality control of one, so to speak. Because this figure, in terms of its build quality, can be a bit shaky. So if you really want a Vegito, go for it, but just expect that you need to fix a few things along the way. Thanks for watching. Catch you all later.